So now that we have this, we are going to move on to building our backend using a library called FastAPI. So FastAPI is a Python library for building backend applications. So you switch to your terminal and you run pip install FastAPI and click enter. So to install any package in Python, this is how you install the package. You type pip install and the name of the package. So I'm going to wait for this to install. While this is installing, we'll create a new file here called main.py. So remember, we keep this as it is, so we can make reference to it later. So now that we have our main.py, this is where our backend is going to be. So let's just wait for this to complete installation so we can continue with the course. Okay, so now I can confirm the installation is done. Let me make this smaller. So the first thing we want to do is to import the library we just installed. So by default, you can't use FastAPI in this file, even though we already installed it in Python. So to actually use FastAPI to build our backend in this file, we need to import it. To do that, we write from FastAPI, we import FastAPI. So to begin creating our backend application, there are three things we need to do. Firstly, we need to create an app for our backend. Then we need to create endpoints. I will explain what endpoints mean, but for now, let's understand what the app is. So basically, here we have in our hello.py, we are running this app in the terminal. And remember, we have a while loop which keeps the app running forever. So we need the same kind of logic here where our script keeps running forever. So you don't want your website to just run once and stop. You want your website to keep running forever. So instead of using a while loop here, we won't be using while loop. We'll be using something from FastAPI. So this thing we imported from FastAPI, you can see we imported a capital FastAPI from a lowercase FastAPI. So this first FastAPI is called the module. If you hover on top of it, you can see module FastAPI. So from the module, you can also see some description about FastAPI framework, high performance, easy to learn, fast to code, and ready for production. So from the module, we imported what we needed from that module. So this module is basically a file. So it's basically the same thing as our main.py file and hello.py file. So you can actually check the content of the fast API module. If you hold control, you can see it's changed to this icon that supports clicking. So once you hold control and you click on this fast API, it takes you to the file of the fast API. So you guys can see this is also a fast API. Sorry, this is also a Python file. So let's close down and right click on this one. So if we click on this fast API, we can see the actual file where the fast API that we just imported is. So this is called the class Python. We are going to get to what classes are later in the course, but just know this is what we are importing. So this is also an object. So basically, we want to create a variable to store the instance of this thing that we imported. So to create the variable, we do the app equals to fast API, and we open and close the brackets. So now we have an instance of our app. We just created our app, our backend app. So after creating our app, we can run it to see what we currently have. So originally we run apps using this play button here, but for now for our backend we won't be using the play button. We are going to run our code manually from the terminal. So to run your fast API application, you type uvcon. So this uvcon is was installed when we installed Fast API, but it was installed automatically. So once you type Yuvicon, you enter space, you type the name of your file. So if you were using this hello.py to create your backend, you type hello here, but since we are using main, you type main. Remember, don't put the .py. So you just type main semicolon and app. So this is how you run your fast API application. So basically, you're using Uvicon, which is like the server we are using to run our application. Uvicon, then space, the name of your file, and the name of your app. So if this was my app, then enter my app here. Remember to save this file. So once I click enter, as you can see, it says started server process and Uvicon running on. So basically, my website, the backend is currently active on this URL right here. So this is called your localhost URL. This 1.127.0.0.1 is the localhost address for every computer. So now I can test this. So open any browser you use. Search bar, just type 127. You can forget the HTTP part. 127.0.0.1 semicolon 8000. And you can also click on the link from here. You can see if I hold control and I click, you can click on it from there and it opens the same address. If you don't want to keep typing this number, the shortcut is just to type localhost. It is also the same thing. As you can see, we got the same detail not found. We are going to fix that now. So you can see from this from your terminal, you can see all the requests being made to your website, to your server. So if I refresh this, you see it's logged another request. So everything is saying not found because we don't have any endpoints in our current file. So endpoints are basically what comes after your URL. So let me expand this so I can explain. So for instance, this is the base URL address. So if peradventure you host this website, let's say you host it as my2doapplication.com. So this 127 dots, everything here represents your domain name, which is at my2doapplication.com. So what comes after that is called an endpoint. After this forward slash. So websites could have different endpoints like home, profile, and so on. So the reason this is saying not found is because we by default we need to have a basic like the index endpoint, the home endpoint, where once you visit something like google.com without the forward slash, it needs to lead you to a particular page. We currently don't have that page in our application. So now to create our endpoint, we start by typing at and the name of our app, which is my app. But so let's just rename this to app, which is what most people use for their app. You can name this anything you want, but just to follow the way people name their flexible application in Python, in the Python community, this is what we use. So after this app, you type dots, then just as we have um, methods called from these are our to-do objects, just as these are to-do objects as like the clear method, the append method. The first API we imported, which is this, also has some methods we can call to create an endpoint. So basically, if you notice from this terminal, it says for each request, let me make another request so I can explain what I'm trying to explain. So if I refresh this, you can see this get here. It means this is a get request. So what you should know is all browsers make a get request. So when you enter a URL here, the browser sends a GET request to that URL address, to that website address. So that's basically what it's doing to our backend. It's sending a get request to forward slash. You see, let me change. Let's enter a random endpoint that we have. So let's say we try to access home. You see a get request to home and it's saying not found. So basically, we need to create a get request to this um, empty endpoint. So to do that, we have different kind of requests. We have the get, the post, the delete, the put. So the type of request you want to undo, you add it here. So that's for the get. And also undo post, also undo delete. So for this, you want to undo the get. So if for instance this is post, this won't catch. Let me first create the get so I can explain that. So let's say after inside this get parentheses, we add the empty element. Then move to the next line. Now on the next line, type def and you can name this whatever you want. I'll explain what this is in a second. So this line is a function. So what a function is a way to bundle a bunch of activities, like a bunch of actions under a single name, under a single variable name. So when you call, for instance, we have this app, it's just a single value. But let's say once you call a variable, you want it to perform multiple actions. That's why you use a function. We are going to understand functions more as we progress through the course. But for now, just know this is how you create an endpoint. So basically, we create the endpoint and the type. This is called method. So you create that at the top, and on the next line, you create a function, and each function needs to return something. So once the user visits this page, what do you want them to see at that here? Now to see this on our browser, we need to close this. So to end your server, so this is our server running. To end this, you come here and type Control C. As you can see, server shutting down. So shut down. So now we need to run this again for our changes to reflect because our server was running before we made those changes. Okay, now while trying to run it, you can see I used my app and we already renamed this to app. So if you're wondering how I'm retyping what I already typed, you just come here and use the up arrow. So once you type the up arrow, you can see your previous history. So yeah, instead of using my app, you just need to pass. Now our server is running. You can come here and then refresh. Okay, this is still home. Remember, we need to change this. Let me make this bigger. We need to remove the point of this. So now as you can see, we have I, which is what we returned here. Now instead of returning fall for not found, fall for means something not found. So there are different type of error codes. The error code we have been saying, fall for means a page is missing or something is missing. So now we got a 200 OK. So this is the status code you want to be getting. So they are called status codes. So now you can see the get to this is, so for instance, if we change this to post, which is also valid, we change this to post. Another thing we need to do instead of, now that we change this to post, if even if we refresh our web page, it doesn't reflect. So one thing we need to do is make our server automatically refresh itself anytime we make a change here. So instead of closing and launching our server every single time, remember Control C to end your server. So after typing this, the up arrow to bring this back, to bring this back. So after typing this, we need to pass another flag to make sure our server reloads the seventh time we save. So now after typing the app, we put space, two hyphens and reload. So that tells the server to reload itself. Now when I press enter, you can see we'll watch for changes in this directory. So it's watching this direction anytime I change anything. it's going to reload the server. So for instance, let me come here, enter and save. So as you can see, watch file detected changes in main.py reloading. So it reloads anytime I save this file. So now let's say I want this to return hello. So if I go back to my browser and I refresh this, as you can, okay, I already changed this to post. So what I'm trying to explain the other time is, if we change this to post, even though we have the endpoint, this bare endpoint, this base endpoint, it's still not going to it's still not going to return hello because I told you the browser always sends a GET request and we only have a post request. So you can have two endpoints to this and have this one called GET and this one named post. So as you can see, this didn't give us 404 because the endpoint actually exists. It's just having a different method. So I told you these are called methods. So this is giving me a underline because we have um, variable with the same names. So let's change that. But we don't need this for now. Let me just remove that. So now when I visit, sorry, okay, something happened. Okay, just ignore the error. So now when I visit this, I should get hello. You see, I didn't need to stop the server myself. It automatically reloads itself. So now instead of returning just a string, what we have here is basically a string. Let me just make this. So here we are returning a simple string. This is not what a website looks like. So we have different type of response in Fast API. For now, the two you should know are, let's say three, the play response, which is this, which is just a string. We have the JSON response. We'll get into that later, which is what you're going to use a lot for your backend application. And we have the HTML response. So the HTML response is what most websites uses. So for instance, if you visit a website like google.com, you don't see anything like this. You don't see a blank page with text. You see a well-designed website. That's what you use HTML response for. Beside that, you can use but when you're creating an API, which is just a backend application, say you want to create a backend for your let's say mobile app application, then you need to use JSON responses. We are going to get into that everything later in the class. So now we need to return an HTML response. So firstly, to do that, we need to add something to our get method. So we need to tell it the type of response it should be expecting. So to do that, we type response model. So you select, you can see the autocomplete brings a lot of options. You select response model, you can just type it in full. So for the response model, you type HTML response. So you can see this is giving us underline because we currently don't have this variable created in our file and it's not a string. Remember from our previous classes, you can't call a variable you have not created up here. So we don't want to create this variable. It's actually something we need to import from Fast API. So Fast API already has something. Sorry, not from here. We need to do from Fast API dot responses. So this is where we have the different type of response. So we need to import HTML response. If you try to import other response, we have the JSON response. And the plain response, you don't need to create a response model. So now it treats this as HTML. So once remember to save, once you save, then refresh this page. Oh, sorry, this shouldn't be a response model, this should be a response class. I made a mistake. So you can see it's already giving me an error here saying invalid argument for response feed. So now I can just refresh. Now you can see the difference. This is a page. You can see we have a white page and an yellow text. So now we can write HTML within this line. Let's say we want a very bold text, we can use the heading one tag. Hello. So I expect you to have a basic understanding of HTML and HTML tags because that will take a lot of time if I'm trying to explain the HTML. So you should understand basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You don't really need to understand JavaScript, a lot of JavaScript, but it makes sense to understand it, especially if you're just doing backend development. You don't really need you really don't you don't you almost don't need the HTML because most of the time you will return in a JSON response, not an HTML response. But for the sake of explaining and building how to do application, we need the HTML. So now I can refresh this and you can see my text is bigger. So if I removed the response class and I refresh this, as you can see, this does not format it as HTML. It just gives us the text as it is. So I can just Ctrl Z to add my response class. Now let's start creating the to-do UI. So firstly, let's create a variable to store our HTML string. So normally, we use double quote for strings. There are other things we can use. For instance, since we are going to be creating an HTML, we want to, and it's going to be multiple line because the HTML code we'll be writing here is a lot. We want it to be multiple lines. So let me type something here and type enter. As you can see, there's an underline immediately. We cannot have multiple line of string in single quotes. If we want to have multiple lines of string, we need to use three quotes. So this is three, and we close it with three. So now this we can have multiple lines. As you can see here, there is no error here. So once we have that, let's create a div. Let's close. So in our div, let's have an h1 and name this we can just call this my to-do application. Then we can close that. So now let's refresh this. Okay, we need to return HTML. As you can see, it just gives us a blank page because we didn't return anything. So we need to return this HTML we created, the variable. So now I can refresh this. Now we have this. So let's give this a little bit of styling. So in our first if we can style equal to and create an. So basically we are doing this here because The process of creating an HTML file and rendering it here is a little bit complex, and I want to say and I want to easily explain the concept of returning an HTML. And I want to briefly explain the concept of returning of creating an endpoint. So I don't want us to go through the hassle of creating an HTML file and importing it here. So therefore, let's give it a margin. Let's say 50 pixels, and also so this 50 pixels is to give it 50 pixels on the right and the left, and also just means center it vertically. So yeah, let's give this a background color so you can see what we are working with. So background, and let's use a gray F5, 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 and now the border radius. So it looks like a card. Pixels. Okay, I forgot to add a semicolon here. Okay, let's also give this a max width. Say 600 and say padding. Remember to always add this. Let's say padding of let's say 30 pixels. So this is what it looks like now. Now we can start creating our inputs. So first thing we need the user to enter a to-do list. Let's create a paragraph first. Say your to-do item. So basically we're creating what we had in our hello.py file. So we have enter a new to-do item. So let's say enter a new to-do item. So we need an input. Let's say with the placeholder um my to-do. So let's refresh that. Okay, I guess we have an error, do we? Let's just make sure this refresh. Our server is, I think this server run into some error. So let's just close this and rerun it. So as I said, UVCon main and reload. Okay, now we have this. As you can see, we have the paragraph, the inputs, and the placeholder my to do. So let's tie this input so it makes more sense. So in the style, let's give it a padding of 10. So that makes more sense. Let's make it full width. No, let's make it like 70%. So width 70%. And that should be, let's just save that and refresh. Yeah, so now let's create a button. So I can just copy and I can just duplicate this line. Let's say to do that, I just type Control C and Control V. So that duplicates the line. So we want this to be a button. So we can just remove the place so that for the styling, let's give it a background color. Let's move this width and give it a background color instead. Let's say 7. Let's give that a value. So this will be the text of the button. And here we can say type equals submit. I don't know why we keep getting error here. Okay, this might not happen on your side, but let me just refresh this. Okay, so we have the hard button. So let's add some more styling. Let's add some more styling so it makes more sense. So first thing we should do is change it to white, remove the border. So give it a border radius 4 pixels. Okay, so now it's making more sense. Let's add more padding on the vertical side. Sorry, on the horizontal side. So 20 pixels. And you can see this cursor doesn't change to pointer. Let's make that also change to pointer. So you can say cursor pointer. Okay, so now it changes. We have this and that. So we have a basic structure for our application. You can add that, but currently it does nothing. So for our button to actually submit, we need to wrap this in a form. So we have the form. We also need to so for format purpose, let's just tap this one. So for our form, we need to set the action to the endpoint to the endpoint you're going to create to add items to our to-do list. And then we need to set the method. So posts, we need to set method for post for sending items. So basically, this action has to be whatever endpoint you want to create for adding items to our to-do list. And the method, I mean, the method is whatever method we use to create the endpoint. So let's name this. These are the things on the button. So now once we click our button here, it will make a post request to our server. We are going to check that to see. Okay, so now when I click add, as you can see, we sent a post request to add and we returned the file for not found. So let's refresh this. Okay, so that means we need to create the add endpoint. So remember that the app name dot posts add. So for this, we don't need to give it a response class. I'll explain that. You'll see why in a second. Let's just create our function. Let's say add. So this add needs to take what we want to add. So let's just create and that we move to the next line. So we need to create our to do, where we want to add the to do, the add here. So basically we need to create this empty to do so we can later append to it. So here we want to so to do that we are not going to create our to do in any of the endpoints because we want the to do to be created immediately the user visits the website. And let's create that up here. So the user doesn't have to go to um the home endpoint to create the to do. So now we just need to do to do's dot append. So now what do we append? Okay, so what do we add to the to-do list? So since this is a form, and when we click submit, this form sends form data to our backend. So to get whatever was sent here, we need to create, we need to add a parameter into this our add method. So parameters are basically, so for instance here, as you can see, this append takes only one parameter. So clear has no parameter. So what we have been doing since is similar to clear, takes no parameter. There are some that take one, there are some that take more than one parameters. So now we need to create ours. We need to add a parameter to ours. So we want to get whatever the browser passes to the form, which is the value of whatever is here. So let's call that to do. So remember the name here has to match whatever value you passed to. I don't think we passed the value yet. Okay, so now I can go into my input, which is this, and add a value to it. So I'll say value value equal to the. So now I'll come here and create the value. So I'll say form. We also need to enter this form. So here we are creating an object called form, which is the way to pass the form data from the front end. So here on the first line, just add form to the import. So just like we created the variable here, we need to create that here as well. So we are creating a default form and add three dots here. So now we can do to do's dot append the to do. So let's just print in the terminal. So remember, print only works for terminal, not on the website. So you can't print anything here. So let's say we print out to do's. And then now we don't want the user to visit a different page. We want them to remain on the same page. So we just want to refresh this page. So to do that, instead of returning a string or whatever we want to return, you just return a redirect response. So you basically just redirect the user to the same page, to any page we want to redirect the user to. So we can say redirect response. So remember we need to import it as well from here. So redirect response. So here you open a bracket, you pass the URL you want it to redirect to, which is just the endpoint. So we want it to redirect to that. So now when we click on, let's say I had ABC. Sorry, I need to refresh this. I need to refresh the page. So let's say I have ABC and I click add. Okay, we got. Okay, sorry, I used value instead of name. So that should be name, not value. So now let's go back, refresh the page. So now I can just enter A, B, C and add that. So I got method not allowed. Let me see why that is. So as you can see, it's sending a push request to the Bayer endpoint. So we don't want that. We can tell we can tell we called our post endpoint, and you can see when we printed it to this, we got ABC. So we know that is working fine. What we need to do here is to pass a status code, which is so we are going to pass a status code of 303 instead of, as you can see here, it's passing a 307. We want to pass a 303 instead. So now let's go back and click on add. As you can see, nothing happens. So this is doing everything we wanted to do. But let's show the to do here instead of printing it here. So what we can do is to add the to do to the screen here. So let's say do HTML plus. So we want to add the current HTML string to another HTML string that has the to-do items in it. So to do that, you do plus equal to this. So this is the same thing as typing HTML equal to HTML plus string. So whatever you have here, just add it to this. So this is a cleaner way to do it. So what we want to add here is our to-do items. So we don't just want to add them as the way it is here. So we don't want to add it as a list object. We want to add each and every items in the list to a separate, let's say a bullet point or so, or something like that. So to do that, instead of just doing this immediately, we use something called a loop. So just as we have a while loop here, we have another type of loop called a for loop. So basically, a for loop runs. His for loop is almost the same as a while loop, but in this case, you you can create a for loop doesn't run like infinitely. It doesn't run forever. It runs while a for loop doesn't run forever. It's used to iterate over something. So, for instance, we have a list of to-dos. We want to iterate over that list to get every single element in that list. So basically, we are going to do for to do. Let's not get the names confused. So let's just say for item in to-dos. So this gets every single item in to-do. So this runs while there's the item in to-do. So let me complete this sentence and I'll explain it. So we want to do HTML plus equal to, let's just add the item immediately like that. So remember, let's add a on that list here. No, let's add the other list. So in this other list, we are adding every single to-do item. Let's add that as a list item. So remember the f string, the semicolon. So you can add the item. Let's make this a list item. Close the list item. So after that, we need to close this other list. So let's do HTML equal to close the other list. So what this does is it takes for every single item you use to, let's say we have items apple, orange, and banana in our to-do list. So it goes for every single item. It starts from the first one, which is apple. It adds a list item to here. So basically we have this the list item. So it goes to the second one, adds another list item, go to the third one, which is orange, add another list item, then it closes this. So this stops immediately their normal items into the. So now let's run that. So currently nothing happens because there's nothing to do. So let's add a to do item. As you can see, we have the ABC. Let's say Z1Q. So we can confirm the to do is working. So let's type this properly. Let's add. So first things first, we need to not close our div. So it's in the div. So we close the div here after the whole thing. So let's give this a little bit of styling. So in our ordered list, let's add a style. So let's remove the padding here. So this has a padding by default. And for our list item, let's just make the background white. So you can differentiate it from the card background. Okay, now you can see an error here. So our string starts with a double quote and ends with a double quote. And here we're also trying to type a string. The reason why we didn't have the error here is because we're using three quotes for our string. To fix this, you can change this to a single quote instead of double quote. So strings can also use double, single, three doubles like this, three doubles, or three singles. So you can also do this is also a valid string. So here we can type background and make this white. And let's also give that a padding and a margin. So padding of 12 pixels and a margin. Let's just give it a back margin at the bottom so there's space between the list items. 8 pixels. So now let's refresh our page to see. So now when I start with Apple, we have that. And let's say orange. Okay, now I need to remove these numbers. So let's say this um this style. We can also add a border radius to this so we can keep the UI consistent. So let's say border radius of 4 pixels. So now let's refresh the page. So if you notice our list keeps clearing every time we refresh the page, that's because our to-do list is not persistent. So basically we are only using a variable for our to-do list. To make it persistent across user refresh, that's why we need the database. And we're going to get into that soon enough. But for now, we just have to keep retyping our to-do. So I don't think the list can work. Let's make this another list. So now when I refresh, okay, I also need to close an order list instead of other list. Okay, now we have our basic to-do application and we can add any item to our to-do. So the list can grow.